David Sharp, entomologist. David Sharp FRS 18 October 1840 27 August 1922 was an English physician and entomologist who worked mainly on Coleoptera. He was among the most prolific publishers in the history of entomology, with more than 250 papers that included 7 major revisions and reviews, and a highly influential work on the structure and modifications of the male genital structures among the beetle families. He was the editor of the Zoological Record for 3 decades. Biography. David Sharp was born at Towcester and lived his early years in Stony Stratford. Some 12 years later, his parents removed to London, where he received most of his education. After attending 1 or 2 preparatory schools, in 1853 he entered St. John's Foundation School, which was then at Kilburn. At the age of 17, he commenced to help his father, a leather merchant, and about the same time he began collecting beetles, some of his favorite haunts being Kenwood and Hammersmith marshes, as well as the sandy shores about Deal and Dover. Lacking an interest in business life, he chose to pursue a career in medicine. He accordingly, after studying for 2 years at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, went to the University of Edinburgh, where he obtained the degree of Bachelor of Medicine in 1866. After graduation, he assisted a friend with his practice in London for a year or 2. He had at first some thought of seeking an appointment in connection with entomology at the British Museum, but abandoned the idea, and about 10 years later he went so far as to apply for the post of curator of the City of Glasgow Industrial Museum, being recommended by H.W. Bates and Frederick Smith amongst others. However, after his short residence in London, he was offered a post as medical officer in the Crichton Asylum at Dumfries, which led to his taking charge of a case at Thornhill in the neighbourhood, where he joined the Dumfriesshire and Galloway Scientific, Natural History, and Antiquarian Society upon its reconstruction in 1876. This engagement gave him the leisure he desired for prosecuting the studies on which his heart was set, and it was during this period that he published some of his earlier papers. It was also here that his marriage took place. In 1883, upon the death of a wealthy patient, William Cunningham Graham Bonteen 1825–1883, to whom he served as a special medical attendant, he returned to England. Bonteen had been injured on the head by an Irishman during the Irish famine. The injury led to serious mental issues, and the patient was declared insane and admitted to the Crichton Royal Institution. Sharp initially went to live at Southampton, but, finding it too far from London, after about 2 years, he removed to Dartford. In 1885 he was invited to go to Cambridge as curator of the Cambridge University Museum of Zoology. There he spent the next 19 years of his life, till in 1909, when he retired to Brockenhurst, where he had built a residence lawnside, on the very edge of the New Forest, facing the extensive heath of Blacknowll, where he resided till his death on 27 August 1922. Positions held. In 1862 Sharp became a Fellow of the Entomological Society of London, and he was its president in 1887 and 1888, his presidential address being at the end of the former year on the subject of entomological collections, and of the latter on the census of insects with special reference to that of sight. Between 1889 and 1903 he was on several occasions a vice president, and he was on the council from 1893 to 1895, and from 1902 to 1904. While living in London, he was secretary to the Society during 1867. In 1886, he became a Fellow of the Zoological Society, and he was on the council from 1901 to 1905. The Linnean Society is also able to claim him as a fellow since 1888, and he was connected by membership or correspondence with the chief entomological societies throughout the world. The high distinction of being elected a Fellow of the Royal Society fell to his lot in 1890, and the next year the University of Cambridge conferred on him the degree of Master of Arts honoris causa. Publications. Sharp was the author of more than 250 papers and larger works. Being connected with the Entomologist's monthly magazine and the Entomologist, in either an editorial or a reference capacity, many of his numerous shorter papers appear in these magazines. Yet others, as well as some of his more pretentious papers, will be found in the transactions of societies with which he was connected. Perhaps his earliest contribution to entomological literature was a paper on the British species of Agathidium coleoptera read before the Entomological Society of London on 6 November 1865. An interesting discussion on heredity and kindred subjects between Sharp and Wallace, arising in connection with Westwood's introduction of the subject of mimicry at the Entomological Society of London in November 1866, was reported in the Athenaeum of 1, 8, and 15 December 1866, and gives Sharp's views at the time on this subject. A revision of the British species of Homolota coleoptera was published by the Entomological Society of London soon after his graduation at Edinburgh. In November 1873 appeared a paper in Spanish Especies Nuevas de Coleopteros por Don David Sharp. This refers to insects collected by his friend G. R. Crotch, whose obituary notice Sharp contributed to Volume 11 of the Entomologist's monthly magazine. The Object and Method of Zoological Nomenclature appeared in November 1873. This is an important and well thought out paper on a debatable subject, the argument of which is perhaps summed up in the sentence nomina si nescis, paret et cognitio rerum, which appears on the cover. A short paper on the Coleoptera of the Scotch fir came out in the Scottish Naturalist about this time. The Dactylidae of New Zealand was published in the Annals and Magazine of Natural History in July 1878, while work on the water beetles was taken in hand for publication by the Royal Society of Dublin. Sharp and Fowler's Catalogue of the British Coleoptera appeared in 1893, the Rhynchophorus Coleoptera of Japan in 1896, the articles Insecta and Termites in the Encyclopaedia Britannica in 1902, and an article on the orders of insects, a subject in which Sharp was much interested, in the Entomologist for 1909. The Distribution of Plants and Animals on the Globe, a paper read before the Dumfries Nat. Hist. Society in 1883, Stridulation in Ants 1893, an account of the Phasmidae 1898, and the Grouse Fly 1907 are away from his special order Coleoptera, while a scheme for a national system of rest funds or pensions for working people 1892 shows that Sharp could detach himself from entomology when he wished to do so. Sharp's major papers included those on the Coleoptera of the Hawaiian Islands published by the Entomological Society of London in 1878, 1879, and 1880. These were followed in 1899 and 1908 by the Fauna Hawaiiensis brought out by the Royal Society. This was followed by his work on the beetles of Central America, prepared chiefly from material collected by Frederick Duquesne Godman and Osbert Salvin, and published in 1894 and later years in that monumental work known as the Fauna Centrale Americana. In 1895 appeared the first volume of the Insecta in the Cambridge Natural History. Of their influence on the advancement of entomology, and especially of our knowledge of insects as living things, too much cannot be said. The publication was so popular that it prevented him from producing a new edition incorporating improvements in the classification of the insects. He published on the topic in The Entomologist. In 1910, the Insecta was translated into Russian by N.Y. Kuznetsov. In 1912, the Entomological Society of London, with the assistance of the Royal Society, all the beetle families were examined, and the results of numerous dissections are included in this highly influential work on the beetle families. Perhaps, however, the annual volume of the Zoological Record, published by the Zoological Society, is the work for which most credit should be given. This is a list of the publications for the year in all branches of zoology, British and foreign, classified under the headings of author and subject. Sharp was editor for the whole and recorder also for insects. No one, unless he has seen something of the work involved, can imagine the amount of detail to be sifted, and the care and knowledge required to prevent errors. He entered on this work, which was to some extent a labor of love, in 1892, and his methodical treatment of the publication greatly improved it in every way. This work he continued till the year of his death, even completing the reading of the final proofs of records for 1920 during his last illness. Personal life. Sharp knew most of the British naturalists of his time: Huxley, Bates, Wallace, Buchanan, White, etc. He was a great friend of Spencer, and in 1904 wrote an article in the Zoologist entitled "The Place of Herbert Spencer in Biology," having particular reference to him in connection with the teachings of Charles Darwin. At around the age of 17 or 18, Sharp went with his father to Switzerland and greatly enjoyed the trip. In later life he went to stay with Oberthur in France. The loss of his friend G.R. Crotch, librarian to the University of Cambridge, was a great blow to him. They had been closely associated in entomological work, and had made several excursions together to the New Forest, Rannoch, and to Spain. Sharp often spoke of the primitive conditions in years gone by to be found in the New Forest and in Scotland, and told amusing stories of their difficulties in the way of procuring food and lodgings. With another friend, Bishop, he visited Sherwood Forest, and the last letter he wrote during his illness was to this friend, who died only so recently as 26 August last. In Brockenhurst, Sharp worked assiduously with one of his daughters, who later married Frederick Arthur Godfrey Muir, in his entomological laboratory, elucidating the life story or the anatomy of numerous insects, chiefly Coleoptera. His beetle collection went to his daughter Mrs. Muir. Sharp's extensive collection, including several thousand type specimens, is housed at the Natural History Museum, London. Principal publications: 1869, a revision of the British species of Homolota. Transactions of the Entomological Society of London, 1869-03, 91-272. 1874, the Staphylinidae of Japan. Transactions of the Entomological Society of London, 1874, 1-103. See also 1888. 1876, Contributions to an Insect Fauna of the Amazon Valley. Transactions of the Entomological Society of London, 1876, 27-424. 1880–1882, Monograph on Aquatic Carnivorous Coleoptera or Diticidae, Scientific Transactions of the Royal Dublin Society, 2-1-800. 1888, the Staphylinidae of Japan. The Annals and Magazine of Natural History, 6th vol. 277, 477. 1876. 1882, 1886, 1882, 1886, Staphylinidae. pp. 145–824. In 1882–1887. Biologia Centrale Americana. Insecta. Coleoptera. 112. London, Taylor and Francis, Roman 16 plus 824 pp. 19 plates. 1887 Cephalidae, pp. 146. In 1887-1905. Biologia Centrale Americana. Insecta. Coleoptera. Tuone. London, Taylor and Francis. Roman 12 plus 717 pp. 19 plates. 1891 Scintillaidae. In Biologia Centrale Americana. Coleoptera insecta. Coleoptera. Tuone. London, Taylor and Francis. 438-440. 1896-1913 with Robert Cyril Leighton Perkins and Alfred Newton Fauna hawaiiensis. 1912 with Frederick Arthur Godfrey Muir. The comparative anatomy of the male genital tube in Coleoptera. Transactions of the Entomological Society of London. Roman 3, 477, 462 36. P 523 PL. 60, Figs. 107-109, male genitalia. Sharp also contributed to 2 catalogues of British Coleoptera with Oliver Erichsen Jansen in 1871 and with William Weeks Fowler in 1893.